Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Seattle's Civil War Legacy on a Wednesday evening. Looks like we got a few people tuning in already. Great. So tonight we are doing our second attempt at Civil War Unscripted, which is exactly what it says it is. So tonight joining me, us, is John Heckman, the tattooed historian, Cameron Sowers, and Kendrick Gibbs. So why don't we go around the loop here and let everybody kind of tell us, educational background if you want, and kind of what you're up to, and what your passion is about, what aspect of history or whatever. So Kendrick, why don't we start with you? We'll just go clockwise here.
Okay. So I currently live in Richmond, Virginia, but I was born here, but my blood is up in Pennsylvania, New Jersey. And I went to Shippensburg University of Pennsylvania, graduated with a BA in history, minor in business in 2015. And then the next year I graduated from Shippensburg as well with my master's in applied history. My goal was to work in public history, which I did start as. I was the, just kind of naming some past jobs that I did. I was at the Seminary Ridge, or formerly known as the Seminary Ridge Museum. I can't remember exactly what the new name is now. I was also director of the Shippensburg Historical Society. And my last job in public history was down here in Richmond at the Hanover Tavern Foundation. I was the program and education specialist. I left the public history field trying to find a new career, and currently I am about 12 days away from going to Cape May, New Jersey for Coast Guard boot camp, starting a totally different avenue. But my interest in history really lies mostly between 1850 and 1950. Civil War was one of the first loves, and I like and I'm sure you're going to hear the same thing from John as well, about liking the human interest stories and like the common soldier. That's kind of where my stories kind of come in. I'm also, because I'm joining the Coast Guard, I'm really interested in the Coast Guard's legacy and history as well. And with a lot of my family, my mom's side of the family from New Jersey, I have had many ancestors in the life-saving service. So I love researching what I can about the life-saving service, lighthouses, the Coast Guard's history, everything like that. So
Awesome. Well, Cameron, let's let you introduce yourself.
I just have to say, I'm glad I don't have to follow John, because Kendrick, and I'm sure you share this feeling, it's hard to ever have to follow John in anything.
Yes.
This is the first time I'm like with John, I think virtually, in over a year. So this is like a nice reunion. I've been locked away. I graduated from Gettysburg College in May of 2021. So I'm coming up on a year there. I'm currently an MA student in the history department at the University of Kentucky. So I'm down in typical Kentucky fashion. The closest brewery / distillery is less than a mile, and the closest horse track is right out my front door. So like the Kentucky brochure is kind of where I've been dropped in the middle. My research, I started off very interested in military history, and I've gotten away from that partially because the demands of school. But I'm really interested in right now histories of gender and race, particularly their intertwined history throughout the 19th and 20th century South. So I'm really the more and more I'm in a 20th century U.S. history seminar right now, and I keep like feeling the pull of the 20th century. So I'm glad tonight I can kind of get back into the Civil War and remember why I loved it so much.
Awesome. And John, for anybody who doesn't know John, the tattooed historian, you can tell us about you and your background.
It's an interesting story, but first, Richard, I gotta say that intro music slaps. Okay, that is some good stuff. I don't know where you got that from. That is amazing. I want that for my Twitch stream. Anyone who doesn't know me, my name is John Heckman. I grew up in South Central Pennsylvania, 25 miles from Gettysburg, and so that was my second home for years. I was a reenactor for 25 years before I said that's enough. My body said that was enough, and I was done. But in that time, I went to, like Kendrick, I went to Shippensburg University, Pennsylvania, earned my and then earned my MA in history from the same place in 2013. In 2014, I worked alongside the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as an archival assessor, basically a multi-million-dollar archival assessment project. I was on-site team lead for that. Did that for about 3.5 years. Started the Tattooed Historian brand from my cubicle because I wanted to try to get my next job, and no one really knew what I was doing. So I wanted to have it digitized as far as like a digital resume kind of thing. And it blossomed from there into my own business, and it became an LLC. 4 years ago tomorrow, it became an LLC, and the rest is my own kind of history, where I've been doing digital history since 2018 full time, was live streaming well before the pandemic, and podcasting and doing all that stuff. But I really had the idea of creating a brand because I wanted my own radio show when I was a kid. And I wanted it to be like you have on public radio where you have historians on to talk. And for years, that was kind of inaccessible. And then with the glory of the internet and social media and stuff, it's become a level playing field. And here we are 4 years later. And the brand is going on 7 years in September. So it's been a really great thing. And I grew up Civil War historian, mid-19th century, and progressed on until about 1945. From there, started out as a military historian, and now I basically study the cultural history of conflict. Like Kendrick said, the more personal stuff. Death and memory studies is a big thing for me right now. So I'm working on some stuff with that, and I will be an adjunct professor at Shenandoah University in the fall of this year. So I'm really looking forward to that as well.
Well, so the death and memory thing is pretty good. I think that might be a nice segue into coming up with this evening's sort of first line of discussion. Because I was thinking, I will say too, just for those that don't know who have followed my channel, is I owe certainly a great debt of gratitude towards John for sort of paving the path for us as, I guess I would say, self-starter digital historians. In knowing that it's possible, right? And I think that's one of the factors that got me started on the Seattle work was just seeing things like you were doing in others, and it really opened the door to making, like you said, leveling the playing field and making things accessible. And you speak of before the pandemic, and I remember the first thing, I think, when I first started following your page, you were doing some, and I've told you about this before, you were doing some live streams from Gettysburg, just by yourself, out walking around. And I think you were out around the Rose Farm or Bliss Farm or some, I don't know, some single syllable named farm on the Gettysburg battlefield. Yeah, and being, 2,000 miles plus away and just, removed so far in time from my last visit, it was like, wow, we can connect with this thing like that. And I'm not just watching a recorded tour program, and I'm not listening to a lecture. It's very intimate and personal and without structure. And you were just observing and talking. And I was like, wow, this is a totally different thing. I didn't know this existed. And then just all of a sudden it opened up all these doors. So, my work is really contingent upon having seen yours, 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, or whatever that was. So anybody watching tonight, we're all watching because John, what he does, and he kind of has kicked everybody's ass here for the last 2 years and gotten us into these things.
Oh, it hasn't been only me. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I know.
There's a lot of people who have jumped on and done some great work. And Richard, you've done great work. Cameron's done great stuff. Cameron and I did stuff together in the field when he was with SCWL. Kendrick and I have done some things. We were at Antietam together. We all 3 or 4 of the people on here have worked together in the field, and so we just need to get Richard east, or I need to get to Seattle, and we do something out there. But there have been some great historians and people who just study the humanities in general, whatever it could be, anthropology or something else, who have really started especially during the pandemic era, as I call it, when we were forced to kind of embrace this thing, I was just kind of like, I don't want to say ahead of the game because I don't like to toot my own horn, but it was one of those things where I just stumbled into something where it was like, wow, there's a need for this, and I had no idea.
Yeah.
And it went from there.
Yeah. So speaking of that, so other than probably outside of the Civil War realm too, who are the people that you guys like to follow? Who's your accounts that you like, or historians whose stuff you're following? And I'm talking about online content and video, that kind of stuff, not necessarily reading. But Kendrick, you were talking before about being interested in the Coast Guard and so on, history. Is there anybody in that realm that you could recommend for our viewers that you follow? And
not that does any like video live stream things like this. Sorry, my dogs are decided to play at this time. I just got back from the gym, so they were in their crates.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there isn't anybody that does like anything on the level of like what you do, or like John, but there is a page called the Foundation for Coast Guard History. I will make a little plug for them. They post almost daily. And it's kind of cool because like they'll pull in like articles from like the Coast Guard's history blog, the historian's office, things that they write up themselves, some other blog posts, and just things that you could find all over Facebook, like independent. Then they pull them into one spot. And it's been really cool because I've learned so many little snippets. I'll name one right now since we're talking about the Civil War. The U.S. Revenue Cutter the U.S. Revenue Cutter, which was a predecessor organization to the Coast Guard, the modern day Coast Guard. The Harriet Lane was the first fired the first naval shot of the Civil War at Fort Sumter.
Wow!
And that was, it's not something you usually hear about. You usually are hearing about what's going on inside the fort and the Confederate bombardment, but not necessarily any of the naval forces. And if there are talk of the naval forces, it's not any mention of anything. It's not USS. You're not hearing USRC or anything like that. And so I just found that to be, and I learned that by, following that page. And that's just a great example of anything that, anything I can find. But that's probably the best page that I've been able to, that takes a lot of different things and puts them together.
So what about you, Cameron? Who's your go-to
as
social media?
As Kendrick was answering that, I was like opened up my Twitter to see who I follow and like who posts good things. I'll say I love Rich Condon stuff. Rich was you guys, Kendrick, I know you know him from Pennsylvania and the Civil War project that you guys do. Rich has the coolest job in the world in my eyes. He's right now a ranger at the Reconstruction era National Historic Site. He was previously at Flight 93, I think, which another really cool site to work at. And he posts some funny stuff, which, some funny Civil War humor, which I deeply appreciate because we do this all day. It's nice to be able to laugh. He does a great kind of series of photoshopping John Brown into contemporary images. So I love to see the stuff that comes out from him and his coworkers about Reconstruction. Along those same lines, the folks over at the National Museum of Civil War Medicine, their social media posts is killing it. I know Jake Wynn was there, and he now has moved on, but he does some great stuff on his own on Pennsylvania's coal history. So I'll say the Pennsylvania, I think, is really like killing the kind of digital history game. We've got a lot of people in it. So a lot of great Pennsylvania history people who are out other places now doing stuff.
What about you, John? Who are you liking right now?
Well, obviously Seattle Civil War Legacy.
Well, yeah, obviously.
Let's just get this out of the way right
Roll
now.
credits.
Yeah, done. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Yeah, have a good night, everybody. I'll tell you, the person who has pushed me without realizing it, and I've told them this to their face, but I don't know if I've ever said it on any stream, so you're getting this one free here. It's Steve Fan. Steve Fan pushes me to be better and pushes me to keep going. As far as like, I've learned how to take in other people's streams without taking in how they do it. I take in the information without how they do it. But Steve is different in that I'm watching him And it's almost like when Magic Johnson was playing against Larry Bird, and they were always like, I bet he shot 500 free throws today, and I only got 400, and I need to get out there and do another 100. I see him posting, and I'm like, I got to keep up with Steve. I got to keep trying to do this, and be like, oh, Steve got a post in today, and I didn't get one, you know. And it's a nice competition without being in competition. And I think when I find someone like that, I latch on to their product because they are making me better. And Steve is doing that, and he's doing a great job down there in Kentucky as well. And you know, I need to get down there and visit him. But there are a lot of, you know, I can't think of how many I've come across in the last year and a half of live streamers and podcasters, and the list goes on and on and on. And my concern is that sometimes everyone's starting to sound the same, and it's kind of like, how do we break the mold in that way? How do we break free of that kind of thing, especially if we're interviewing the same people, you know, a couple weeks apart? It does get kind of like, you need to find your kind of like thumbprint, your fingerprint of how you do it. And people like Steve makes me want to push, and that's puts another log on that fire, you know.
Yeah, sure. Well, I like, I was listening to you guys, and I wasn't even thinking about answering my own question, but I tend to find myself more these days a little less on the actual military history side and more on causality of the war, memory, because at least with what I'm doing, when I'm studying so much, of course I'm studying what these guys did at Gettysburg and Shiloh and whatever, and I love that stuff. But it's less valuable to me than it is understanding the context of these guys in Seattle and why they're important and why they're sort of double what these guys did at Gettysburg. Their importance in the Civil War, you know, having done what they did to open the gates to do what they did later. So I've been finding myself leaning a lot more towards like late 19th century history and just different angles of interpretation. It's just stuff I'm not looking for, hoping to hear something that's going to make me think about something I hadn't thought of before. You mentioned gender stuff, and I've recently discovered a bunch of veterans here that were really involved in women's suffrage, both right after they came here in 18. There was one guy who came from Massachusetts. Well, there's four of them that came together in 1866, like just after the end of the war. And in 1872, he had this big convention for women's suffrage. This is decades before it's a thing nationally. And Susan B. Anthony is here. She's at his house. She visits Seattle. There's all this stuff. And then I'm finding later in the 19-teens that there's other veterans speaking out about it in 1910 or 1912. And all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I gotta dip my toe in this, and I gotta learn, because that is the valuable interpretation for what happened to them here in Seattle. So I'm kind of like just taking what I get from different stuff. There's people on TikTok that I follow that I love. There's some British historians that don't do anything about what I like, but I just like how they do it. Like John was saying with Steve, I watch it and I'm like, man, I wish I was that good. How do I get that good? Like, what did they do to break it down? And like, why is this so captivating to listen to? So what I'm watching is not so much Civil War right at the moment. That's all I spend my time researching. But when I'm listening to other stuff, it's going out into all manner of different stuff. So Kendrick, how knowledgeable are you with the revenue cutter stuff during the war? Is that something you've put much time studying into? And
I've looked into it. There's not a whole lot of really interesting things that happened, like battles or whatnot. I think there's a couple of interesting points that to kind of point out. They were put on patrol to help the Navy find rebels and hunt them down that are trying to, we're up to no good. And one thing that was actually pretty interesting, June of 1863, an incident known as the Battle of Portland Harbor revenue cutter Caleb Cushing was actually captured by Confederates, and actually the rebels ended up destroying the cutter after that. But a lot of times they were they were involved at Fort Sumter, captures of Fort Clark and Fort Hatteras along North Carolina. They were in company with the USS Monitor and the USS Galena and the James River during Drury's Bluff. So a lot of time what they were doing was just kind of pulling support for the larger Navy gunboats and more well equipped. But they were in a lot of the naval actions during the Civil War. They just kind of were, they weren't taking a front seat, so to say.
Were they involved in like troop movement or logistics and moving supplies, that kind of thing?
I haven't really looked that deeply into it, so I'm not sure what kind of support they were giving when it came to logistics. But I know that wherever the Navy was, the Revenue Cutter Service was quickly behind because, and this came into play later on in, when you get into like World War I, but when they needed to board ships, because they were part of the Department of the Treasury that did a lot of customs work, they had the knowledge and expertise of knowing how to board a ship, which is something that's still done today. It does today. So it's kind of unique to see how their role has evolved, and how it stayed the same, really.
That's interesting. Yeah, there's in one of our Grand Army of the Republic Cemetery here in Seattle, there is a veteran who's buried there. On his gravestone it says Revenue Cutter Service, and he's the only one. Obviously, they're pretty rare to find, I think. But I didn't even know I'm like, we'll get to that.
What is that?
I don't even know what book to look for to even talk about this guy. So now at least I have some indication that it's Coast Guard history. Yes. In the roots of the Coast Guard is where to find that. Story.
At the time of the Civil War, they were known as, and this is what they were known as from 1790 up until about 1890. For about the first 100 years, they were known as the Revenue Marines.
Okay.
And they operated cutters, which are smaller, fleet-footed craft, smaller than the Navy brigs and frigates and things like that the Continental Navy and then eventually the start of the U.S. Navy had. But they were a lot smaller, quicker. And like I said, because they were part of the Department of the Treasury, they did a lot of customs work, which they had up until they were part of the Treasury until 1967. Then went to transportation, and then now they're Department of Homeland Security. But there is a book out there. Give me a couple minutes, and I can tell you what it is. That talks about the history of, I believe, the Revenue Cutter Service, because it didn't change names to the Revenue Cutter Service until 1890, like I said. Then eventually became U.S. Coast Guard in 1915. But I can probably find you a title of the book. I believe there's one out there that has a history of the Revenue Cutter Service. And maybe you can be able to hopefully get some leads on this guy that's in the cemetery.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Kendra, if you do find that while we're going here, just throw it in the comments there for anybody else who's interested in that.
Will do.
So, Cameron, what's I'm not even sure what to ask after that. I'm totally like at sea. So now we're pretty. I mean, when you think Civil War, all of us, I think, are guilty of this. And Kendrick, you may be one of the lone exceptions. We just think dudes with muskets and cannons on the gently sloping hills of Virginia in South Central Pennsylvania and all of that. So have you or John, either of you guys ever like really explored Civil War naval history, either Brownwater Navy or otherwise? Because I'm pretty much in the dark about it. Although I do have one good story. While you guys are thinking, I'll finish. So there was an incident here in Seattle where there were two men who had lived here for a time. They were both veterans, naval veterans of a ship that had been blown up. I want to say it was on the James River, and it had struck a Confederate mine or torpedo, I guess they called them at that point, right? Blew the thing up, and these two guys were the only guys that survived. And they were friends because supposedly they were, the only guys flying through the air in this thing, and that's how they became friends. And they would meet every year here in Seattle for like a decade or so, and I think they both moved east to Chicago or DC or something. In researching that story, when I found out about it, I learned that there was an actual officer in the Confederacy that was the head electrician of the Confederate States of America, which I thought was amazing. Just the fact that exists was amazing, and he was in charge of the detonation systems. So they had these big batteries that were made out of brine or whatever, and they would run things out, and they would set them up and light the things off because they wouldn't go on contact, so they would actually time them. And there was a dude, he was in charge of electrical engineering for the Confederate Army, which is or Navy. Of course, I'm telling you what's fascinating to me, but anyway, so yeah, what's do you have any interest or anything with Civil War navies? Have you studied that, or why not if you haven't? What's the deterrent?
I wrote one thing on the Civil War Navy in my time at Gettysburg, and I went in to find it. I wrote it for the Civil War Institute's blog. I was churning out blogs my sophomore year of college. I didn't have anything better to do. I guess that was before I decided to do my homework, where I wrote about the symbolic kind of value and power of the officer swords, which were these incredibly ornate crafted things. The Navy still issues them to officers now. So I wrote about their value in terms of kind of setting order and discipline on the ships, and how that relates to some of the class and racial tensions that exist on U.S. Navy ships. The Navy ships in 19th century America kind of create a social world of their own, which has produced some really interesting archival finds for the first half of the 19th century about things we don't often think about. So that was my one kind of foray. I always keep my eye on things in the Navy or flip through them because I'm so interested in the Navy. The U.S. Navy is ahead of the Army in terms of using black men as, I don't want to call them sailors because they're oftentimes navigators on land before they get enlisted onto the boats. So that's a project I'd love to write about one day. But I got a couple of big projects to get through first before I get there.
So, John, other than World of Warships and constantly being at the bottom of the sea in that game, has naval history during the war been anything that's caught your attention at all over the years?
It was one of those things that I think I was interested in it when I was a kid, because there was this like made-for-TV movie called Ironclads that came out, and it fascinated me for a little while, and I was wondering what all this was about. And then it kind of like fell to the wayside because I didn't have anyone in my family who was in the Navy since the Revolution, and so I was like, I don't have a connection to it. My people were always ground pounders. They're on land. And so I kind of went with what I had heard through my family. So I never really did a lot of research into Civil War navies, sadly. I was, always the guy that was doing the, stuff with infantry and artillery. And I didn't even get into cavalry because we didn't have any government. It was just, I was kind of like in this tunnel with land warfare, just infantry and artillery. And I do enjoy going to like coastal forts, and there you have to kind of understand the naval component of it, right? Because they're coming in there and bombarding or resupplying or whatever else. So I got into it that way. I kind of have this thing for going to coastal forts and looking at their design and stuff like that. So that's probably as close to naval history in the Civil War as I've ever really gotten.
Yeah. Kendrick, are you very well studying like Drury's Bluff and things like that in being there in Richmond? Or because that's a whole thing that I understand the significance of, but the tactical history, for some reason, that battle just escapes me.
Well, and I'm in the same boat as you, except I probably, on the other hand, I've been to the site. I've been down there. So I've at least seen like the terrain. And I mean, it's a bluff. If you know if you hear the word bluff and you have any physical or idea in your head of what a bluff looks like, it's a pretty large cliff. The fort that was up there that was being fired upon from the James River. Props to the gunners on those ships that were going up the James River, because I couldn't even tell. I'm not good with numbers. I'm not a math person. I couldn't tell you how far, couldn't tell you how high, or anything like that. But just being able to stand up there, it's a great vista from up there on Drury's Bluff, and it's a very easy walk from the parking lot. So if anybody's ever in the Richmond area and is trying to find something new, Drury's Bluff is a really cool site. Very small site, small walk, not really hefty on the of a hike or anything like that. But and then not too far away from that is like Fort Harrison.
Is it part of the national park?
Yeah,
it is. Okay, I didn't know if it was a state park.
Yeah, Richmond National Battlefield is kind of this encompassing national park site that includes all the battlefields. From down to Petersburg's its own, but from like Drury's Bluff and Malvern Hill all the way up to like Cold Harbor.
Yeah. John, have you been to those battlefields much, the peninsula or the battlefields around Richmond?
I was down there recently. I just did a trip to Williamsburg and Yorktown.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
So I got to see Yorktown, a battlefield from the Revolution, but also thinking about how that's changed due to Civil War fortifications at the same time, because they're basically reusing some of them. But I never I still have yet to go to Malvern Hill and some other places, but I'm going to hold out until the anniversary later this year, because it's the 160th anniversary. And I think I'm going to go. And if I can get cell service, I might do some lives off the cuff like I did that you remembered, because we seem to get good feedback from that. So I'm kind of holding out until that time frame to make my way down there and go into Richmond and hit Pearlie's for brunch and, go to Hollywood Cemetery and do all that. So, but I've really gotten interested in the Peninsula Campaign within the last year and a half because of recent studies on the environmental history of the Peninsula Campaign and that's something else that's really started to fascinate me. I was never good at science, but man, I can get into the environmental history stuff, and to walk that ground and to feel that sandy soil under your feet, and then understand what that's going to be like when it gets bogged down, and then your army gets bogged down, and you look like you're getting a case of the slows, when actually it's just the environment's not working in your favor at the time. It's amazing to me how that turned my idea of a campaign on its head, because I grew up with the old Ken Burns way of looking at the peninsula, the Bruce Catton way of looking at the peninsula, and some of the stuff we learned in the 90s, of that stuff. Now with this environmental stuff coming in, that stuff has really piqued my interest, where I'm like, now I'm seeing it, because, we've reenacted, Richard, and it's kind of like, we know what it's like to be bogged down out there just for a weekend and be soggy and miserable and all this stuff. It slows you down even for a day. And it's like, these guys aren't going home. They're not going anywhere. So they're bogged. Yeah. And I think that really piques my interest. So I definitely want to hit Malvern Hill and a couple of these sites, like Kendrick said, because I have yet to really walk that ground and to take it all in.
Yeah. I think too, there's this reassessment or renewal of interest in McClellan. It seems like the last couple of years, I've just heard more and more of everybody kind of coming back around to, maybe he wasn't that bad. Maybe he was, better than we thought. And so, of course, it kind of makes me think about the peninsula a little bit. But in my history of studying the war, I've just come from that classic background that it's the war. Basically, there's Fort Sumter and then there's some other stuff. And then it really starts at Antietam in a way. And then, so there's been times where I thought, like, man, all these incredibly enthusiastic early war volunteers that were probably some of the best soldiers the Army ever had, that died in these early battles, that died at Shiloh, that died at Malvern Hill or Gaines Mill or all these places, that I'm like, that was a different Army entirely than what we saw in 1864. And it makes me really want to reassess those early actions around Richmond and some of the crazy cavalry stuff. A lot of the Seattle veterans were involved in some of these different raids and things around Richmond that are, all throughout the war, that I wish I could could get more out of. But so have you put much into that, Cameron? The peninsula and McClellan?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to be able to get some time touring around down there because I worked for a summer at Fredericksburg in Spotsylvania. And those battles fascinate me now. One, I'm currently writing a little bit about O.O. Howard. So gotta have to talk, give the little prelude, summer of 1862. But the thing that fascinates me about it is also the thing that challenges me is dates and places / knowing where anything is on a map is my problem, both when studying history and living as a person now. Couldn't find my way out of a paper bag. And so when I think about the summer of 62, I'm like, it's just a miserable, long fight the whole time. It's really how it seems like. And you get kind of the notable moments that pop up, like Joe Johnston's wounding. I'm always fascinated by like the visual, like the hypothetical scenario of like Joe Johnston wounded going one way and Jefferson Davis going the other way to like check out the army and see what's going on. So I think that's just a really interesting. I love like those battles have so much potential for study in them. So I think it's really fun to read about it. I have Sears's History of the Peninsula Campaign somewhere on a shelf that needs to be read. But I also think some of the primary source accounts of what the experience of battle is that we get, some of the really good ones that I think need more attention come from there because, we know we can get great descriptions of battle from Gettysburg or Chancellorsville, Antietam, or anything in 1864, but 1862 before Antietam offers us a lot of, I think, really interesting ground to kind of still study.
Sure. I know somebody who's on here with us sometimes is Dan Casella from New Jersey, and he's just started up a new page for South Jersey stuff, and he's been pulling up a lot of letters and newspaper accounts from the historical society that he works around the Battle of Williamsburg and the Peninsula Campaign. And I kind of thought the same thing, like, wow, this is rich material that we just don't hear that much. Not to say historians haven't covered it, because of course they have, and better than we'll ever do it, but it seems like there's that voice of the war from that time is a little underrepresented, I guess. And so go ahead.
I was going to say, and to your earlier point about McClellan, and I know John's been on the Let's Rethink McClellan train. I think if there ever was a good time to do it, to rethink of McClellan, it's going to be now. We've just got Bill Marvel wrote a book rethinking John Porter. Kent Brown's just offered us a great new perspective on Meade at Gettysburg. We've gotten great new ways to think about the military history of the war, how units function. So I think somebody out there could probably write now, and we have Scott Hartwig's about to put out a 900-page book.
Oh yeah,
it's the second half of his Maryland campaign study. I mean, I think that alone will get a great new perspective on McClellan. Yeah. So I'm sure someone could put together a really fascinating biography.
Now, I haven't watched enough of his lectures or read enough of his writing. What is his opinion on McClellan? Do you know? Like, does he have that more modern reassessment kind of look, or what kind of takeaway do you have from his? Because I mean, he's got to be one of the go-to guys to have an opinion on that matter without the level of scholarship he's done on the battle.
This is the moment. I have spent a day out on Antietam with him, and don't know. I have. I'll admit it. That's
a historian right there.
Yeah, I'll admit. There's a reason I didn't go into the law practice I had once dreamed of. Apparently, something about asking the right questions was needed. But I think I'd be curious what his take on McClellan would be. Because I'm sure if there's anybody who could probably have the evidence to back up any opinion on him, is going to be Scott Hartwig.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah. So, Kendrick, have you spent much time on those Peninsula Campaign battlefields when you were there?
I've been to Malvern Hill a couple times. Been to Gaines Mill. I never made it to Glendale. I wanted to make it to Glendale. I was Doug Crenshaw, who wrote a book on Glendale, who also is very active with the Richmond Civil War Roundtable, invited me to go out sometime in the wintertime to go to the spot where the Pennsylvania reserves were, because my fourth great uncle was wounded there at Glendale, shot through the foot. I got the pension records where he had to prove by somebody that was there that he actually was wounded, which was actually a friend of his that was a lieutenant. He was a corporal, but his friend was like a lieutenant. And they were like, I assume they must have been neighbors in their small town in Pennsylvania, because he went to him. And he also was there at the time that he was shot through the foot. They were retreating because they were getting overrun. And he talked about how he felt this like intense pressure right in his foot, and looked down and there's a hole and blood coming out. And I thought that was the most crazy thing I've ever read, seeing stuff, kind of, mentioning earlier about liking the personal stories, the interest stories, and of the common soldier. I mean, he was just a common soldier, he was just a corporal in the 12th Pennsylvania Reserves Company G. And, but yeah, I never got a chance to go and do that. But Glendale or Gaines's Mill, Cold Harbor. When I was at the Hanover Tavern, we did a bus trip or a bus tour with Drew Gruber of Civil War Trails down to the Battle of Williamsburg. And you had mentioned, talking about Dan Casella with his work with the South Jerseyans that were at Williamsburg. And that whole Peninsula campaign before 7 Days is just an underappreciated, not talked about part of the Peninsula campaign. I mean, that is the true Peninsula campaign, is because it started right down there in Fort Monroe, moved all the way up into Richmond, and we only hear about the last part of it gets the most glory, but not those few battles around Williamsburg, the siege of Yorktown, Dam Number 5, those type of things. Those are not talked about. And Drew gave us a great tour of these spots. And what's kind of crazy is, we were in a hotel parking lot. We were in an empty lot right out of a bus depot. Like, these are spots right along US Route 60 that there's no signs. And just some of the artifacts that were found. And over the course of the years, Drew was not representing Civil War Trails at that moment. He was representing the Williamsburg Battle Williamsburg Foundation. I can't remember the exact the organization, but and they were very active in that, getting that together, all the history of that, and then also trying to preserve the land through Civil War Trails and American Battlefield Trust and things like that. And there is a book out there, Williamsburg and the Civil War, that is a great look into what life was like in that area and during the battle as well.
So because I know that's still clearly a passion of Drew's, is still working on the Williamsburg stuff in addition to the Civil War Trails. Do you feel like they're making significant headway in that? I don't know how long you've been associated with him and those efforts, but
probably since about 2018, so about 4 years. But I mean, I can't remember exactly when, and maybe Cameron or John know, but I know that there was some land that was preserved, and honestly, I don't remember. It might have been American Battlefield Trust that had been bought, hopefully to help preserve that area. Because, like I said, part of it's in like a hotel, like inside of a hotel. The other one's like I said, in front of a bus depot. Like, it's not the most obvious spots, but it's important to the story of the Peninsula campaign. I mean, to me, prior to the 7 Days, if there's one battle that I think really should be looked at for its ferocity, would probably be, if that's even a word, I think I'm looking for ferocious, but Battle of Williamsburg is definitely one to look at. There's a lot of crazy action, and honestly, it's really hard to get a sense of the terrain because it's so modern. Right. Back then, it was just a bunch of trees and woods and creeks, and it's not flat. That's another thing. Everybody thinks down there on the peninsula, on the water, flat. No, it's not flat. There are plenty of hills and bluffs and high ground that was very important. So
So if you guys had Well, we got about 10 minutes more or so here. We'll continue, but if you had a place that you've been, a battlefield that you've been to that you thought was needed more of that, needed more recognition, needed more preservation, needed better signage, that sort of stuff, that you were just there and you thought, man, I connect with this place, and I wish this story was being told better, because all of us have spent plenty of time at Gettysburg, and where it's all laid out for us. Not only just the study of it, but the presentation of it, the preservation of the site, the interpretive, everything is there. But so many of these other places, we've had pet projects with battles that were like, oh man, this one's obscure, and I'm gonna dig. I love this one because my favorite guy was there, or I had an ancestor there or something. So I'm curious if you have anything like that you're like, this is my favorite spot, and if I had $1 million, I would. This is the battle that I wish I could, save from obscurity.
Wow.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
That is a tough one.
I know mine. I thought of one right away. It's my favorite one. I don't want to say it's my favorite battlefield. It's got, to me, just the fun, a hilarious existence, and that's Ball's Bluff, which is not a national park, not a state park. It's like a community playground.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I saw it. The first time I encountered Ball's Bluff, I was at the battlefield. I was on my way to 2nd Manassas with Stan McGee from Harper's Ferry in the 5th New York. And if anyone knows Stan, he is like the most stern and serious, kind of intimidating man. And then he has moments of pure hilarity. And I was like, is that actually Ball's Bluff? As we're stopped at like an intersection in, suburban Virginia. And he goes, yep, what's left of it? And just keeps on going. And so when I had the moment to go there one summer and just walk around, I was like, this is one. There's a couple of Civil War graves on it, which is like right next to a very modern Northern Virginia suburb now. It's right next to one of the big DC airports. I think is it Reagan that's right there? Or Dulles?
Dulles.
Yeah, Dulles
Yeah.
is down there. So that's kind of the environment you're in. But the ground that's there, once you kind of get through a tree line, you are in a battlefield, and you completely forget about how modern it is on the other side. And Ball's Bluff, I went and toured it in the middle of July, and I was like, whew. But to think that battle was fought with the Potomac pretty much icy and really cold, and that's the first, and if I'm 99% sure the only time a sitting U.S. senator is killed in battle. There's just, to me, a lot of human interest stories and moments that come out there, and that, to me, it's a small battle in terms of kind of casualties or size, and the battlefield that's left is super small. But to me, just a sight, I would jump at the chance to go back or to ever write or work there.
What about you, John? You got anything yet, or you need a minute?
Well, I'm going to do like I do with a lot of the history field and go rogue here. I know a place needs more signage. I know a place that needs more restoration, and I would rebuild it if I had the millions of dollars to do it. So the one that needs more signage is Cedar Creek, and because that was like my first infantry reenactment in 1994. So it's like in my heart that I want to save this place, and I want it to be interpreted correctly. And it needs signage, it needs trails, it needs all that stuff, so you could follow the battle and it's a defining moment, right? It's the last gasp of the Confederate Army in the Shenandoah Valley. They retreat up the valley, and that's it, basically for the Confederate Army. So Cedar Creek, in my mind, needs more of the interpretive thing, and that's a whole different story, because they've been having they're trying to get to that point, right? It was when I was reenacting on the battlefield, Richard, you were probably there with me, and I didn't know about it. It wasn't NPS site. It wasn't any of that. It was just, it was a different place at that time. So I would want more signage and interpretive markers and trails there, foot trails. If I had millions and millions of dollars to rebuild a site, I'd want to get the original Yankee Stadium back up and running. We would rebuild Fort Sumter. because that thing needs to be 3-tiered again, and it needs to look like it looked like, just as a symbol of what she once was. I would love to do that. If I only had a couple million, we would do Castle Pinckney, because Castle Pinckney needs cleaned up and brought back to her former glory as well. But here we're going back to forts again. You know, did I maybe think, hey, that thing's just sitting there rotting. Let's do something about this.
Maybe they could do something with projections and screens and stuff to show, you could be at the certain point on the beach looking, or not on the shoreline, looking towards Fort Sumter, and the NPS could project something to show it in its actual size and proportions and form.
Oh, I'm sure.
Something would be
dude, I'm
neat.
sure in the next 10 years you'll have an AR or VR experience like that.
Yeah.
It's going to happen, where you're just going to do that, and it's going to be there,
John, I've got a friend that works at Fort Sumter. I'll put you in touch and let you know if the place is ever up for sale. I'm sure. I know that, like, I have $10 in my bank account just spare to chip into the Buy John a Fort GoFundMe.
I mean,
Sure.
I mean, it's a fort fetish thing, my friend.
I
I
think that's just something that sells itself.
Yeah, we do take Bitcoin, so there you go. Yeah. So,
what do you think, Kendrick? Do you have a favorite site that you're just like, man, I wish this was better?
Yeah, actually, it was a lot easier once I really thought about it, or stopped thinking too hard. When I was working at Hanover Tavern, I learned about some of the Civil War history around the site, but then there was, there's battles and skirmishes all over Virginia throughout the Civil War. Things that you hear about, things that you don't hear about. Going back to this Peninsula campaign, there was the Battle of Hanover Courthouse in May of 1862. It was a one-day engagement. It was one of the first small victories that McClellan got right before the 7 days. This is May 27th, and it was one of those what would have been moments. You can put it in perspective. There was a brigade of Confederates at this crossroads just south of Hanover Courthouse. O'Brien Branch was the commander, which eventually became Lane's Brigade at Gettysburg. And then they were met with the entire 5th Corps under Fitzjohn Porter. And obviously it was a pretty easy defeat. But the reason why that they were moved, McClellan sent these guys north to Hanover County at this point, because they were kind of down where Henrico and Hanover kind of meet. So this was a little bit out of the way. They were thinking about troops moving down from the valley and from the DC area to help reinforce McClellan's army to move on Richmond. But obviously we know, Jackson was out there causing problems. So when that was occurring, they obviously could not move the troops from the valley. And because of the threat on DC, they did not move any troops from the forts around DC. So it really, in hindsight, didn't mean anything. But at the time that this event was happening, it was a important kind of getting the obstacles out of the way to move Union troops down, because there was a major railroad that ran through that area. Now if you were to drive down 301 and US 301 towards Richmond in Hanover County, you wouldn't even know it's there. There's not even a Virginia historical marker, black and white historical marker for it. It's all privately owned land, still owned by families that lived there way back when, and they're afraid that people are going to go and start snooping around with historic markers, which I think is slightly a valid thing, but at the same time, you can, if you have no trespassing, there's the Hanover sheriffs are like 5 minutes up the road. It's not that far to keep it, just having a historic marker on the opposite side of the road. There's an old gas station that's across the street that's abandoned. You can put the marker over there. It could be enough place for people to pull off and read the sign. Not like some of these other signs in Virginia where it's along a busy highway and you can't pull off and read them at all. But what's kind of neat about it is there's really no difference in changes to the battlefield. I've looked at the maps that Robert Knox Sneeden wrote or drew. at the time of the battle. And honestly, the tree lines are roughly the same. The farmland's essentially the same. The family that owns the property right there, actually, the house was there during the Civil War. It was a field hospital. We've seen written evidence of that from the owner of the property, and also from the people that owned what is now Hanover Tavern, which the Union Army after that battle actually went up to the courthouse and spent a couple days there. So, there's no signage regarding that battle on the site. The people that now work at Hanover Tavern and around Hanover Courthouse try to interpret that as much as possible.
Yeah.
How they tell their stories up there.
Yeah. Well, I would say my choice would be, and this is relatively meaningless site. But for me, I just want to see it differently, is the original fortifications around Centerville, Virginia, from the winter of 1861-62, because I went there when I was in school, and I had taken a trip to Virginia. I had a girlfriend at the time, and her mother, where we went to stay, lived essentially on the fortifications of Centerville. And it's all, tract housing and townhomes and whatever for miles and miles and miles. But they did a little tiny strip where there's a little ridge of dirt that runs through the woods, and people walk their dogs on it or whatever, probably. And it just said, Civil War trenches or something. And I'm like, man, there's so much here. There was no battle fought there, obviously, but there's so many images of the place that I really want to see it. There's just that big flat expansive plain that was out in front of them that had been completely denuded of all trees to fuel the camps and build the cabins and everything, that I just felt like standing there. I'm like, I really, really, really want to see this. As well as my ancestors unit, the 83rd New York. There's a photo of them on campaign as they had come back to Centerville after Jackson had been there and no longer there, and they're just off the march, and they have their laundry hanging on little pieces of rope that are strung up, and they're all in kind of various sorts of clothing, and their muskets are just thrown here. It's super, super candid photo of, like, he may be in the photo, I don't know if he is or not, but it's remarkable. And I go there, and it's just townhouses. I'm like, man, this is a picture of them doing what I think about when I think about studying the war, which is the individual men on campaign, figuring out what to do with a wet overcoat in this thing. And then there's a couple guys digging through a pile of stuff because they're looking for Confederate buttons and belt buckles and those souvenirs at that point in the war. And so there's so much going on there that's not battle related. And you can stand at the spot probably if you did all the lining up and the angles and stuff and find it. And I wish I could just for a minute just have enough money to just flatten all the townhomes and rebuild the fortifications line and just say, oh, this is what it was like. He was here with his dudes, and they were looking for souvenirs and having lunch and dealing with wet socks. And this was that spot to me. And I just felt like, this has been totally taken away. Like I can't even visualize it here. At least a battlefield site where you can at least have a map with some reference to this road and this campaign. But this spot was like, it's here. I'm standing near it, and I have no conception of it even existing, really. So that's what I would do.
Yeah. Those 1861, 62 armies are so interesting to me. And knowing that, for me at least, my way of looking at it is almost like 63 is a turning point of the armies, where, in my opinion, and this is just my thesis of the whole argument, is that the 62 army is still kind of that, like, innocent, getting used to things and all this stuff. 63, they really see a lot of massive stuff going on, like post Fredericksburg, post Vicksburg. They've seen a lot of stuff. 64, in my mind, and in the way I see a lot of their stuff tactically, 64, they're trained killers, and these guys know how to kill. And it's you could see it when they get like to Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor. and you keep going. It's to me, the mentality, we often hear about that, right? Where they're like total war, mentality. These guys are a different army in 64 and into 65 than they are in 61 and 62. So you still have that kind of like tinge of innocence in 61 and 62 for a lot of these guys, because they're thinking, I'll be home by Christmas.
Well, and that's kind of what I like about that Centerville image is that I'm talking about, which I wish I thought I could have put it up, but these guys are on their hands and knees digging through like piles of stuff, looking for souvenirs. And you're right, that shit does not happen in the trenches of Petersburg.
No, there was I forget which battle it was. It just escaped me. I can't remember if it was Spotsylvania or Cold Harbor. I think it was Spotsylvania. The artillerymen who were on the defensive positions were actually ticking off 100-yard increments. So when the troops attacking them hit those increments, they knew exactly the yardage, and they were just picking them off, right? And it's like, that's a trained killing machine. That's a trained army. And they're not doing that in 62 at Centerville or anything like that. Yeah. So, yeah, that loss of innocence, when we go back, like Kendrick said and like Cameron said about the person, that loss of innocence, they know their job, so to speak.
Yeah.
That really intrigues me too, where it's a psychological thing. It can just click, and it's just like, okay, we have to do this, and we have this job to do. And they still have those little pings of innocence from time to time, because they are not trained lifetime soldiers. They're still farmers. They're still factory workers. They're still whatever. They're still yeomen deep down, and will be after the war. But man, they have it to a science, literally, in late 64 or 65. It's a totally different armies, totally different than 61, 62. And I think a lot of us really like to read about the 61 and 62 armies because we can connect with them a little bit easier because they're fresh. They don't understand some things, and they'd be like us, putting us on the firing line, being like, well, how do I get my overcoat dry? How do I get my socks dry? And boy, this sucks. And all and they're saying it sucks to the end, but it's like, these guys are just, green like we would be if we threw them out there. And I think that's why we have that connection to them a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's why that site resonated with me a little bit. And there aren't just images of the 83rd New York. There's others that are in associated images taken on the same day. But I'm like, this is just a different aspect of the war than I'm familiar with. These aren't bloated bodies on Gettysburg battlefield or in the trenches of Petersburg or whatever. It's just, and I wish there was a way to see that a little bit more, that early feeling of the war. So, well, hey guys, it's been about an hour, so I think probably wrap it up for tonight. But I want to thank all of you guys for coming on and just chatting it up. I like this. I like just talking and having some fun with this stuff. So anybody that is watching, Kendrick put up a couple links to two of the books that he was talking about. The first one on United States Revenue and Coast Guard Cutters and Naval Warfare. And then a second one. What's the second one? Is this? Oh, it's an Amazon link to the same one. Is that what that is? Okay.
No, it's they're two different books.
So they are two different links. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of them, I didn't link it, the first one, but the United States Revenue and Coast Guard Naval Warfare, 1790 to 1918 by Thomas Ostrom. And then there is a book called the U.S. Revenue Cutters of the Civil War by Florence Kern. So that kind of, and I also linked the Foundation for Coast Guard History in there, in case anybody's interested in, just taking a look at it and see what kind of stuff you pick out of there. It's interesting. Yeah.
Well, I will, because I have my Revenue Cutter veteran out here that now I at least know where to start to tell this, because people ask on tour, so like, what's this? You know what? I don't know. Well, come back in 2023. I'll have that one on the tour. There you go. So I guess, so anybody, John, you want to pitch anything you have coming up soon on any guests you have on or coming up or something while we got some people watching here?
I don't have any guests anytime soon, not till next month.
Okay.
I'm doing Twitch streams every Tuesday and Thursday night at 8 p.m. and we have people hanging out in the chat like Kendrick. We'll get Cameron on there someday hanging out in chat. But we have a good time on there. Sometimes we do some interviews on my Twitch channel as well, so we're meeting a new audience there. And obviously, I'm on all the socials now. If you could think of the social media platform, just look up the Tattooed Historian. I probably grabbed it and run with it. We're going back to in-person events as well in May. I believe May 26th is the date. It's the Thursday of Memorial Day weekend. We'll be live again back at the Gary Owen Irish Pub in Gettysburg with Civil War Breakfast Club.
Oh, nice.
It'll be great to be back in person again. And thank God the Gary Owen still wants us to show up. So they actually were like, when are you coming back? Please come back. And I'm like, oh,
yeah.
Okay. You know. So we're getting back to that as well. And there's more things that I have not announced because I'm an old poker player and I don't show all my cards. So there'll be things coming up here in the future, including maybe a day to walk around a couple battlefields. So stay tuned to my channels if you so desire.
Yeah. And Kendrick, I think we told people in the beginning, you are off to a new phase of life here pretty soon. Yeah. So joining the Coast Guard, and on the 11th, you go to basic training?
Yep.
So
it's 8 weeks. So I graduate June 3rd. And after that, I have about a week or so of leave. And then I have to report to Yorktown, Virginia for my Bosun's May A school. That won't start till July 12th. So I'll have about a month that I'll just kind of be doing whatever they want me to do, which will most likely be painting and cleaning and, scrubbing floors of the bathroom with a toothbrush, most likely.
Yeah.
All told.
Yep. I mean, yeah, exactly. And I'll take that with stride because it's all a growing experience. So I don't care the fact that I'll be a 28-year-old, seaman, as opposed to an 18-year-old that would, most likely be doing those jobs. I'm humbled that I can handle that, but I'll be there for 14 weeks, living like a college student again. I'll be living in a barracks, going to the galley for chow, and my wife will still be here in Richmond. So, and then after that's over in October, then it's off to to a new adventure somewhere. Not sure exactly where yet, but I'll find out about halfway through training. But I'll be off socials for about 2 months. But after that, I can be back on socials once I'm at school.
Yeah. Well, best of luck to you with all of that, and I guess we'll see you when you come out from your social bubble there a little bit. And so, Cameron, what's going on with you? You got anything coming up this summer, or?
He's drinking bourbon and going to horse races.
Well, yeah.
Gambling away my stipend at the Red Mile Casino. No.
There you go.
So I've got coming up in the next 2 months. I am doing the conference paper circuit here in the academy, trying to, just workshopping some different projects I've got going on. Mm-hmm. So trying to get that stuff sold, and then I'm taking the first month and a half of my my summer break, and gonna start writing the good old master's thesis. So gonna start putting that together, and then who knows where the world will take me after that. I'm hoping for some traveling, but also to make some money along the lines, because all that stuff is fun. Just doesn't keep the lights on. So gonna probably not into the glorious history work. I think I need a little break, but I will be causing history mayhem with whatever crazy research project I decide to take on next.
Nice. Well, for me on my end, we're gonna do more of this. Hopefully, get different mix of people on. I think John, you guys are welcome anytime. You too, Cameron. It's always fun to just mix in different perspectives and things. And we may come up with some topics next time, maybe like the Food Network's like Chopped or something. Maybe I'll just flash something in front of the screen and we got to see what we can do with it.
As long as I don't have to actually cook, I think that might be the thing that does in your audience.
Well, I won't do that, but force that on anybody. But yeah, that I'm launching. I just launched a new website, Civil War Seattle and Seattle History Tours. I'm going to be ramping up with the actual in-person walking tours here, probably starting in the beginning of May, is my plan with that. A couple of other, interviews and things like that here on the channel with some authors. I got the Savas Beatty First Wednesdays series that I've been doing, which has really been fun. Having people come on and talk about their recent book, and Meg Groeling was on earlier this month, and Alex Rossino is coming up next month with Maryland Campaign Confederates book. So this helps me satiate the hardcore military history side of things for the audience too. And then hopefully you guys will drop back on here with us from time to time, and when we got stuff going, and eventually I'm going to get back east and be fun to do some in-person stuff on battlefields and things like that. So any of you guys that are around and want to do stuff like that, that would be awesome down the line. Combined forces in person, and like the beam coming out of the Death Star that just converges and then destroys
the complacency.
Yeah. So all right, well, I want to also thank everybody for watching. John McFarland again. He's a supporter of John and I, Valerie Bunn here in Seattle, and everybody. And John, I saw that you posted you're in Lakeland, Florida. I am from Seffner, Florida, Plant City, so I'm going home this month in a couple weeks, so we should probably go see some Confederate monuments or something like that in the area while I'm down there. So just so you know that, reach out through my channel and get a hold of me. So, all right, well, thanks everybody for watching, and we don't have any pressing questions or comments or anything, so I guess I'll just leave it there with everybody and say thank you, and thanks for supporting this channel and John and Cameron and everybody's work, and
thank you.
Share and like and all the other crap that you're supposed to tell you to do on social media. Do that, and have a good night, everybody. Thanks.
Take care,
Thank you.